in class at the moment, we're working through the poetry of Eiléan Ní Chuilléanáin, and we've looked at some brilliant poems: A Bend in the Road, Street, All for You, and NWXO, or To Niall Woods and Xenia Ostrovskaya. This is the first of two videos where I'm going to just look at two extra poems by this poet. Death and Engines is just one of the best poems I've ever read. Simple. It's a very, very, very clever poem, and it's very typical of her style of writing. I'm going to do this really quick because I just want to get it done and focus in on the key quotes. If you are studying this poem and you learned that last part, then you get the poem. It's a very, very, very striking piece of writing. The poem is essentially about mortality and about how fragile our lives are. And it's not something that Ní Chuilléanáin avoids in her poetry. Particularly if you look at something like The Bend in the Road, that image of people that we love wrapped and sealed by sickness, you know. And she says at the end of that poem that this is the space, you know, this is where they are, in the trees, in the air. In other words, people that we love, they stay with us after we die. As long as we're alive and we have memory, they remain with us. And look at the ending of this poem. She's talking about death. You will be scattered like wreckage. Not just such a striking and dramatic line. It's got to do with a crash. There's a theme of crashes in this poem. You'll be scattered like wreckage. That verb choice, scatter, dissimulate like wreckage. The pieces, every one a different shape, will spin and lodge. Look at that cinematic imagery. You can see a impact as the broken pieces of a life spin out. But then there's this juxtaposition between the destructive imagery and the beautiful message, because those pieces, every one a different shape, will spin and lodge in the hearts of all who love you. That's fantastic. You ever loved somebody and lost somebody? Something of them spins and lodges into your heart. So that you remain even after this life is over. You remain with the people that you leave behind. So that's the poem in a nutshell. It's very typically Ní Chuilléanáin. It's very thoughtful. It's very philosophical. It's inspired by her life and experiences, but it's not really about her life and experiences. It's about human existence. And it's about that idea of love. And that word love, To Niall Woods and Xenia Ostrovskaya, The Bend in the Road, Street, All for You. These are all poems that look at love from different angles. This poem, not unusually for this poet, is inspired by an event from her own life, just like The Bend in the Road is inspired by an event from her own life, just like NWXO is. Even, you could say, translation. I'll do a video on translation next week. And this is where she was flying into Orly Airport in Paris, and she saw the wreckage of a plane that had crashed. And she, just like in the beginning of The Bend in the Road, she kind of just tells a simple story here. We came down above the houses in a stiff curve, and at the edge of the Paris airport saw an empty tunnel. The back half of a plane, black on the snow, nobody near it, tubular, burnt out and frozen. When we faced again the snow-white runways in the dark, no sound came over the loudspeakers except the sighs of the lonely pilot. So it's really, 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 easy to read. And she's describing an event where she was landing at Orly on a snowy evening in Paris, and she saw the remains of a plane that had crashed. And it struck her. And she describes it in great detail. We have this description that's so typical of her work. I think the most striking image is the black on the snow. and then the snow white runways in the dark. There's light and darkness together. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think if you think about the work we've done on Platt, you understand the image that playing with light and darkness to represent, struggle and joy and the positive and the negative experiences of life. But she just starts off with this memory. And again, another poem that this reminds me of is Fireman's Lift, another poem about love, and another poem in which she describes an event from her life and then uses it to tease out a philosophical observation about all of our lives. So that's how it starts. Very dramatic, but very easy to understand and very straightforward. Nothing hugely difficult, other than why is she telling us this story? And that mysterious element, is typical of her poetry. The second stanza is just incredible. It's incredible. And it's a stanza where she shifts to think about her experience of loss, and particularly it's about her experience of her dad's passing. And she says, "The cold of metal wings is contagious. Soon you will need wings of your own, cornered in the angle where time and life like a knife and fork cross, and the lifeline in your palm breaks, and the curve of an aeroplane's track meets the straight skyline." So this sight of the crashed aircraft and the reminder of a crashed aircraft, the reminder that causes of fragility, the sudden awareness that we have. We get an aircraft, we think we're safe, but then you see something that's happening, you go, my God, we're not, we're always fragile. Life is fragile. That brings her then in a kind of almost stream of consciousness, to think about her dad. And he's cornered in an angle where time and life, like a knife and fork, cross. An angle where time and life cross. The use of that verb, cornered, is so powerful. You can't escape. When that happens, that's the moment when life ends. And she uses this image of the lifeline in your palm breaking. Now that's an example of a synecdoche, a small image which represents a much greater, usually taken from the body, which represents a much greater idea. It's a form of metaphor. Just that image of the lifeline breaking, and that's death. Death and Engines is the poem's called. She then goes in the third stanza and relates a third memory. And this is when she found out news that friends of hers had been involved in a car crash, and she went to visit them in the hospital. So we have the awareness of mortality from landing in Orly Airport and seeing the burnt out remains of an aircraft. We have the reminder of fragility of life when thinking about the moment when she went to visit her father in the hospital and he was clearly dying, his life was coming to an end. And then we have this third image, the images of relief. So somebody who survived a crash, hospital pajamas, screens around a bed, a man with a bloody face sitting up in bed, conversely cheering through cut lips. Conversely cheering through cut lips. It's like he's hurt, he's injured, but he's happy because he's alive. Another little anecdote, bringing the reader to that point where we think about, again, mortality and the fragility of life. Beautifully descriptive language. The man, the bloody face, he's in a bed sitting up, cheering, the lips are cut. It's visual, we can see him. It's a very, very, very good example of her use of language, aesthetic language, her ability to paint a picture. These will fail you sometime. And then this, just, if it's yellow, I think you'll learn it. You will find yourself alone, accelerating down a blind alley too late to stop. It's a brilliant scenario, isn't it? It's like that dream, when you're falling and you can't stop yourself. Here's an image of yourself, you're in a car, and a blind alley, by the way, is a cul-de-sac, so you're going to hit something. And it's that image of like the inevitable impact. That's what life is. We're careering through life, towards an impact. And the impact is the end of life. And when it hits, she says, and know how light your death is. So that moment when the soul is released from the body, when the life, conscious life ends, and you'll be scattered like wreckage. You know, this incredibly vivid, cinematic image. And comes back to beautiful little simile. The pieces, every one a different shape, will spin and lodge in the hearts of all who love you. So it's a really tremendously interesting poem. I think it's one of the best poems I've ever read, because it's simultaneously simple. It's three anecdotes, all of which are just really vivid. Landing aircraft, visiting Dad as he meets that moment where death is inevitable, visiting friends when they're relieved from escaping death, but ultimately there is no escape. And that's, in the final stanza, communicated in this very vivid image of finding yourself accelerating down a blind alley too late to stop. And that's discomforting. That we don't like to be reminded of our mortality, but what is comforting is the reality that after our life is over, we do remain somehow alive, lodged in the hearts of those who love us. So when we're thinking about Ní Chuilléanáin, we're talking about personal, at times, poems inspired by her personal experience. Not always. Street, All for You, they're fictitious stories that she uses as symbols and metaphors. But storytelling at the heart, she's a narrative poet. She brings scenes to life. She brings characters to life. She's a philosophical poet. She thinks about the experience of being alive, being a human being, falling in love, the illogical, irrational nature of that, the sense of completion, you know, the importance of keeping our individuality, you know, the importance of sharing the journey, the rewarding and enriching aspects of difference, the reality of mortality, love, and how it keeps us alive after we die. There's so much in this poet's work, thematically, that makes it interesting. But there's also mystery. This is a challenging poem. If you don't know the context of this story, and you don't know the context of that story, you don't know the context of that story, it makes the poem hard. So she challenges us to think, she challenges us to learn, she challenges us to find context for what she's saying. And she challenges us to think about that duality of our existence, that it is short and it is brief and that's scary, but it's also, you know, rewarding because we get to love and be loved. That'll do.